Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Mike.
And this is our review of Ready Player One, starring Ty Sheridan, Olivia Cooke, Lena Waithe, Ben Mendelsohn, TJ Miller, Simon Pegg, and Mark Rylance. Based on the book by Ernest Cline, directed by Steven Spielberg, released in 2018 on a $175 million budget, grossed $582 million plus at the box office worldwide. Massive hit. First off, though, Mike, welcome back to Film Strip. Tell folks about what you've got going on over at Amateur Auteurs.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. It's, like I think I say it every single time we talk. It's always a pleasure talking movies with you and coming on Film Strip. Yeah, definitely one of my favorite film podcasts to listen to. Yeah, Amateur Auteurs. We're still trying to pump out some movie reviews. Brian and I are still working on the. It may not seem like it for anyone that listens. The Star Wars D&D adventure. Kind of going a little different track with that just because it takes so long to edit and just getting together. So I think I'm just going to condense them and just release it all in one, just like Netflix, just a data dump, maybe do a season or something, like take a break. But yeah, we're still just trying to pump out episodes. I'm trying to get some special guests on, whether it be fellow podcasters, filmmakers, animators. I'm literally just sending out mass emails. It's like, hey, would you like to come on to my amateur podcast? I'd really appreciate it. But yeah, we're just trying to get some content out, free content for anyone listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Highly recommend checking out Amateur Auteurs. And not just because I've been on the show a bunch of times, but it's always an interesting discussion, whoever you have on and stuff. And glad to have you back for this one, man. This one's been on my list really since 2018 of wanting to do it. And I'm curious to hear your background with this material, the book and the movie.
Yeah, the answer is none. I didn't read the book. When did the book come out? 2011?
Something like that. Yeah, I can't remember exactly when it came out, but
yeah. So I remember. I mean, I don't remember when the book came out, but I remember when it was like kind of making its rounds in like the book circuit. And to me, it just seemed like one of those typical like dystopian teenagers are the heroes type like young adult novels, and this one's just focused on video games. I wasn't interested in it. I guess I was in high school at the time. I mean, I'm not really a huge gamer. I mean, I play video games, but I'm more of a single player, story driven type guy. I'll play Grand Theft Auto and like mess around with my buddies, and that's pretty much it. I play Minecraft, but other than that, I'm not into online gaming. I never really was. I'm just more the story, the first person story part of it. So this didn't really pique my interest. And then when the movie was announced in like 2017, 2018, I also had really no interest in seeing it. But I think that was also mostly due to the director, Steven Spielberg. I have a very love-hate relationship with him now, and I just wasn't interested at all in seeing this movie. It's almost the inverse. They say Steven Spielberg as to try and get this box office draw. And I'm sure a lot of people saw the movie because of Spielberg's name, and it was the polar opposite for me. I was like, I don't even want to, I have no interest in seeing this because he's attached to it.
That is really interesting, especially on Spielberg, because he's so revered, and especially on film Twitter here and everything. So, man, good luck.
Well, yeah, so I guess I'll explain that a little bit more, because there are a few things that I want to discuss, and Spielberg is one of them. So I was listening to a podcast right around the time this movie was coming out, and I won't forget this because this is kind of when these ideas of I don't hate Spielberg. He's just not the same director that he was. And in the podcast, they were discussing this movie, and I guess it was getting mixed reviews. And the host had said, you know what? I live in an age where Steven Spielberg is still making movies, and one day he's going to be gone, and I want to still see his movies. They're still magical to me. That's what this guy said. And I was like, you know what? Like, everyone has their opinion. That's fine. But, Spielberg to me kind of is just the old man yelling in the sky for the most part. And I'll get into that, especially throughout this as well. But when that podcast host made that statement, I'm like, this isn't Spielberg of the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s. This isn't, and that's 4 decades of filmography. This isn't the Spielberg that made Jaws. This isn't the Spielberg that made E.T., Indiana Jones, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, or shit, even Catch Me If You Can, a little bit more contemporary. But to me, Spielberg now, he can do whatever he wants. He's earned that right. But I just feel like his most recent filmography is just this old man that is making just they're not magical movies. I think of The Post, for instance. Like, that movie to me, I was just like, okay. I watched it because I was like, this looks kind of dumb. And I remember watching it, I was like, this is a very competently made movie, but it's not interesting, and I've already forgotten about the movie. I think the only movie that fits that sentiment is Lincoln. I think that very matured, slow-paced, older filmmaker, like that subject matter fits this. But it's weird when you see Lincoln and then now he's making Ready Player One, this action extravaganza with, I think, a medium that he doesn't understand. In referring to animation specifically, and video games and virtual reality. This is a medium that I don't think he understands. And we'll get into that if he does understand it. And the cherry on top that I think was the final straw for me is Spielberg actively campaigning that streaming services, especially content exclusively on streaming services, not theatrically run, should not be nominated for Oscars or any awards. And that to me is frustrating, and I'm going to swear, complete bullshit, and it's not that the awards mean anything. Like, we could have a whole podcast episode about how meaningless the Oscars are, or like the Golden Globes, like any of these. It's just grab assing and brown nosing from these celebrities and just saying how great they are and virtue signaling. But now, like, this media, so it means nothing. But I just think the idea that you're going to shun the new evolution of film consumption and film distribution, and especially from a dude that, you can't make movies like you did in the 70s and 80s anymore. Like, you can't just get a small loan of $10 million and make this like blockbuster hit. Now, like, now with VOD streaming services, you can do that. These voices of minority filmmakers, women filmmakers, these stories of like the LGBTQ community, like communities and voices that were lacking in film are getting a voice in these VOD streaming services. And for Spielberg to come up and say, no, like there's not, we have to preserve the theatrical experience. These, the David Lynch, they're watching it on their phones. It's awful, which kernel of truth, but also I'm on the other side of that. It just feels like an old man yelling at the sky, yelling at clouds, and it's frustrating. And especially from a filmmaker that had left such a mark on cinema, that now he's going this, no, we're going to restrict this. You have to play the game. You have to brown nose to executives. You have to compromise your vision if you want to get a movie made. And VOD streaming services aren't allowing that. Like, they're giving the voice to filmmakers. So that's my long-winded tangent on Steven Spielberg before we get into this movie, but I think it adds context to how I was feeling going into this movie.
Well, I can understand that too. And I will say this enough about Spielberg, that he's got such an oeuvre that it's not like it's bereft of misses. Like, he's done some stuff that's not enjoyable. It's not fun to watch, and it doesn't hold up. And I mean, he's had misfires in between, the mega hits that he's done, and then the, quote, important films that he's made and stuff like that. I think Schindler's List is like the apex of his stuff. And then after that, everything else has been doing stuff that he wants. Because let's face it, this guy doesn't have to do this movie either. I think he did this for two reasons. And this is just, not even beyond what he said in press and stuff, is that this owes so much to the movies that he made and the era he came through. And Ernest Cline will not deny that at all, that that's a huge impact on just his imagination, is what Spielberg brought to the cinemas and that he grew up in. And I think it is an older man trying to relate to the younger generation, kind of like your grandpa gets an iPhone and decides, teach me how to do that text wizard, and kids, it's a little bit of that. I'll disagree just a little bit that he doesn't understand the medium, because George Lucas gets a lot of credit for the work that ILM has done through the years and his groundbreaking special effects. And really what George did was he gave creators space to work in and budget and all that kind of stuff. But Steven is somebody who understands that and has always understood visual effects and medium. And he really geeked out on the idea of, doing what his buddy Zemeckis has turned into his own art form of mocap and matching it with digital compositing and figuring out how to do that. Like he would walk around with the dot headset in the digital room, trying to figure out what the set was supposed to look like and telling the animators, got to make sure this is here and this is here. So I disagree with a little bit that he didn't know what he was doing in the format, because I think he is a genius filmmaker, and I applaud him for trying to stretch and do things that are new. Now, his opinions about who should get awards and all that stuff, we'll come on Amateur Auteurs and have that conversation. That would be a fun one sometime. But as far as for this movie, I got to be honest with you. I heard about this book when it was coming out too, and I was like, at that point, I had done Hunger Games and had seen the disaster that the Insurgent series was, and I was just kind of done with dystopian teenage literature. I mean, one, I'm way older for it, but it can still be fun. But I was just sort of over that, and I didn't want to hear about it. And I'm not a big gamer either. I mean, I grew up playing Atari and Nintendo, and then I kind of skipped a couple generations and, PlayStation. I still have a PlayStation 3, so I'm several generations behind now.
I got PlayStation 2 sitting right there. I see it from
the greatest console ever invented. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't do a lot. I play a lot of sports games, just to kill some time here and there. But I understand the culture is big, and I understand what Ernest Cline was really getting into was more pop culture. This plays off like a big gaming thing because it is a game format, and he used the idea of virtual reality as an escape and stuff. And we'll talk about how that worked. But I didn't pay attention to this book or anything, but I found out Spielberg was making this movie. And I said, okay, I'm interested because I want to see what a 70-year-old has to say about Gen X pop culture, but for Gen Z and millennials. Like that's an interesting cross section of, stuff you're trying to hit there because Kline's my age. He grew up when I did. And so before the movie came out, I went and bought the book and said, I usually don't do that. I'm like, I'll read it if, I'm interested enough after watching the movie. But I said, no, I'm going to make myself read this book before I watch this thing, because I from what I know about it, it'll help me get into it a little bit more, because I don't keep up with virtual reality and technology, all that kind of system. This is not my thing. So I read this book, and I'll be honest with you, Mike, I chewed through it in like a day and a half. I just sat down and I did about half of it one night and half of it the next. And there's some of it that's pretty interesting, and there's some of it that's just rancid. And I remember thinking to myself, how are they going to realize this on the screen? And to his credit, Ernest Cline admitted when they optioned the movie, because they gave him like first pass at a script or whatever, after somebody else had done a work on it. He said, you're going to have to totally change the challenges, because what I wrote in the book is interesting to read, but visually would be incredibly boring to watch somebody, play a perfect game of Pac-Man and then do a virtual simulation where they have to repeat every line of Matthew Broderick in a movie, and I was wondering, I was like, how are they going to do that? One, like my wife works in licensing, so I kind of think in licensing terms. I'm like, pulling that all together is one thing, and I remember the stories about what it took for Who Framed Roger Rabbit to have Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse on the same screen for a minute, like the coup that was when that came out. How are you going to put all this intellectual property in one place? What that's going to cost? And then how are you going to realize this into something that's interesting to watch? Because the Wade Watts character in the book is incredibly unlikable. And he goes through a big journey, though. So his arc is much bigger than it is in this movie. He like gets himself in shape, and, he stops watching porn and all this kind of, he goes through like a big journey. And it's sort of like listening to Ernest Cline go from being a teenager to being an adult. And that's how he kind of describes what that is like. But it's also meandering in a lot of ways and a little too self-referential. And at some point, it just like one more reference, and it's, oh God, how many things are we going to shove in this paragraph? It's almost like a Mad Libs of 80s pop culture at some point. And I'm like, I don't know how they're going to do that in a movie. So I read the book and I said, okay, fine. So the movie had been out maybe a week, and I went and saw it on like a Thursday night. or something after work. There was nobody in the little theater in the college town I was living in at the time. But I went for like the big D whole experience. I didn't do the 3D, but I thought I wanted the biggest screen I could get in my town. We didn't have an IMAX. And so I went in and I walked out going like, okay, big popcorn movie, kind of what I thought it was. And then through happenstance, I ended up winning a free digital code of this movie, and it's been sitting in my Vudu ever since. And I think I've watched it a couple of times now since seeing it theatrically. And I remember walking out of it going, well, I don't hate it, but I don't exactly love it either. But I think it's got some interesting stuff to say. It feels like there's some competing stuff going on. So anyway, all that said, a big preamble to say I didn't love the source material, but I walked out of it going like, well, you know what? That's a pretty good adaptation of that, though, because they took the most interesting stuff out of the book and they threw it in a movie. And I thought they got actors to pull off the stuff that you could get behind, with one big exception. And we'll talk about that as we get into it. But I mean, I don't know Ty Sheridan from anything. I love Olivia Cooke. She was on Bates Motel. I think she's a brilliant actress. Lena Waithe is funny. I think TJ Miller is funny. I know it's not okay to say that anymore, but I think he's a funny guy. Simon Pegg's always a fun presence. And Ben Mendelsohn is just a great, bad guy. And he got to be the bad guy in a Star Wars movie. He got to be the bad guy in an awesome Netflix show called Bloodline. And he's just good in everything. And so when he was going to play the corporate, schlub, I was like, okay, I'm down for this. And the performances were there. So all of that, it led me to this. I'm like, okay, so I want to review this at some point for Film Strip. And it just kind of sat on the deck waiting for, time to pick it up. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to get Mike to do this because it's written by somebody from my generation, directed by somebody from my dad's generation, but aimed at your generation. And the funny thing is, you guys hated it and rejected it. It's people like me that pushed it into that $582 million mark.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, before we get into the plot summary, my first impressions are exactly what you said. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I guess because I had no expectations, and I wasn't as much as I disagree with modern Spielberg. I didn't think he was going to drop the ball. I don't like a lot of his more contemporary works, but they're not pieces of flaming garbage. They're competent movies. That you see the framework, the Spielberg trademarks there. They're not bad. I didn't think he was going to drop the ball. So I left and I was like, yeah, I could see myself returning to this, and that's just, show my hand a little bit, but yeah, I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. And we'll get into specifics of why and where that kind of stems from.
Well, I hear you on that. Let's do the plot summary and then we can get into that discussion. So the year is 2045 and people find their identity, livelihood, and every escapist fantasy known to the human race in something called the Oasis, a virtual reality simulation created by the eccentric James Halliday. This includes our protagonist, Wade Watts, who worships Halliday and all the pop culture Halliday was obsessed with. When Halliday dies, he promises to leave his immense fortune and total control of the Oasis to a winner of a 3-part contest he's designed to find a worthy heir. Other Halliday worshippers, often called Gunters, short for egg hunters, hunting the Easter egg, often interact with Wade. There's his best friend H, a huge mechanical, muscular being in the Oasis, so he's never met H in real life, as well as Samurai Daito and Fighter Sho. And even though he's never met him in person, these are Wade's best friends because his home life sucks, to make short of it. He also meets and subsequently falls head over heels for the mysterious Artemis, who often fools the corporate players in a quest known as Sixers, known for their 6-digit numbers, because there's a company called IOI who's out to also solve the quest of Halliday and run the Oasis and turn it into an ad-laden, seizure-inducing nightmare. So once Wade cracks the first quest, he begins to bring his friends along. They also bring more attention from a corporate goon named Sorrento, who wants to control the Oasis purely for profit, like we've said. and we'll stop at nothing to get control of it. There's lots of adventures. Our crew, race to unlock these different keys. They go through lots of stuff. We'll talk about all the challenges specifically. They even seek help from the Halliday archives and get some assistance from Halliday's old partner, Ogden Morrow, although they don't know it's him at the time. The big finale takes place in the virtual Planet Doom, where all the Gunters go full-on attack against an army of the Sixers. Also, they can figure out how to play Halliday's favorite Atari game, Adventure, hoping to get the last key. And after, a big climactic scene, Wade realizes the point isn't to win that game, but to find the video gaming's original Easter egg hidden in Adventure by its programmer. Wade solves this and is given the final key, and following one final test of loyalty by Halliday's AI presence, he's given the Oasis and all of its riches, which he shares with his new friends as IOI goes down for all their criminal trespasses and credits roll. And that's about as streamlined as I can talk through this 2.5 hour movie that's got so much shit put in it that it's hard to break down piece by piece. I mean, honestly, I think the thing that I will give this movie credit for is from the opening jump, pun intended, Spielberg sets a tone with what you're about to get. All right. You get the Van Halen song pumping in the back, and he shows you how awful the world is at this point. It's stacks of like camper trailers stacked on top of each other. That's where most people live, but they don't really live there. They exist in this oasis because you can not only play games and do all that stuff, but you can earn a living there. You can be a totally different person. I mean, Wade gives us this virtual tour of you can be on a casino planet. You can rock climb with Batman if you want to. And you pick up these virtual coins in hopes of, sustaining a livelihood that on Earth, all you're really doing is sleeping and eating. And then you're putting on your gear and you're going into that. And I thought the way he set that up, the way Wade kind of gets out of his aunt's trailer with her abusive boyfriend, and he has like a little hiding spot in a junkyard. And I'm like, okay, so, 25 years from now, basically, you're telling me the whole world's Wi-Fi is so good that you can set up anywhere you want. Sign me up for that, because I still get bad signals where I live. I thought the world building, because the book takes forever to set this up. And the way that got condensed by Zach Penn and Klein and the 50 other people that probably wrote on this, and Spielberg, because he writes on everything he directs, summing that down to those first 3 or 4 minutes, I'll give this movie credit. It puts you right into a place where, like, hey, you don't have to know everything. You just need to know these simple rules and how this works. And so from that end, I'm good. And I think it's that first shot when Wade puts on the goggles and the camera goes around him and we go into that virtual world. I'm like, okay, that was a nice little transition. That was a good move.
Oh yeah, and like this opening bit, like this is anything that's in the real world. I feel like Spielberg is really, with the exception of a few moments in the simulation, I feel like Spielberg is like top of his game here. Like the depiction of the stacks. So I haven't read the book, but I've watched videos, people just talking about it, describing it. So I like know the points and listen to people describe the stacks in the book, and then seeing it transcribed to the screen or translated to the screen. Like, okay, yeah, this is like really interesting, really unique camera move. It's very fluid. And yeah, I'm going with it. I really, the one thing is there's holy exposition. Like it's just like data dump, which
yes,
I understand you need, especially in this world, there always is exposition, but I was never a fan of just literally just data dumping, because then you just get kind of lost in the sauce. I think that whole opening number of, seeing the stacks, people, so you got someone surfing, you have someone boxing, you have some like this woman pole dancing in the middle of her apartment, like that image, especially, it's like she's an overweight woman, she's like she's clearly a stripper, but it's subconsciously showing like she doesn't look like that in this virtual reality. Like she's like this, I don't know, skinny strippers or whatever doing their thing in this virtual world. That image alone is telling me everything I need. There's a dude surfing on the edge of his in like a cage. I'm like, oh, that's a really unique visual. And then we go into the world and we see all this, and even just through dialogue of, it's a little heavy-handed of, oh, like you don't know what they look like. They could be a fat dude living in his mom's basement in Detroit. Like it's things like that I think really, that's all we need. It's both. We don't need all the information, but they're also simultaneously just dumping as much stuff as they can without them just like literally transcribing the book.
Yeah,
it seems like.
Yeah, and the other thing that they set up and do a good job of playing through is what the whole contest is about and who Halliday was and how that works. And so you have to imagine that a gaming company would become as big as like Amazon or something,
EA
or Google. EA, well,
EA
yeah,
is already like that.
I mean,
this is EA.
Yeah, EA is pretty freaking big. They wish they were this big. It's like if EA became Google or something and had that kind of power, and then there was a split between the guys, which is kind of an homage. I mean, I've always thought Klein was homaging Microsoft with that, with Steve Allen and Bill Gates going their separate ways at some point. But you see James Halliday and you get a little bit of his background, and he's like the uber super nerd genius person. And Ogden Morrow is more of the face of the company, the business side, but not like ruthless. He's a techie too, but he's the one more kind of keep his like super nerdy friend in line or whatever. And I say super nerdy, it's coded the way it's played is that he's kind of Asperger's, autistic a little bit. And I got to tell you,
spectrum.
Yeah, that doesn't come through in the book as much. And that's the thing I'm going to ding. Like, I like Mark Rylance. He sucks in this role. And the way he plays it, I hate it. I'm like, no, this is not the way that the Avatar talks in the Oasis is, the real confident, or whatever version of himself. And I understand like people can be something that they're not when they're in there. That's the idea. And that even Halliday, that was true for, but I didn't like that performance. I didn't like the totally detached and kind of, he looked like, Geddy Lee from Rush too. And that was the other problem. I was like, that's not what that person would look like. I don't care how successful he is or whatever. And it just, I don't know. It was almost too much in some ways. Like, he's I think the weakest part of the cast. The good thing is he's not really in this very much, and they don't ask him to do a lot, but they lay all that out enough to let you know that he dies. And you see like the way that they talk about his death announcement. He sits up in his casket and he's like, if I'm dead, this is what happens. And you can earn a quest for, $500 trillion or whatever it is. And look, the whole world is watching this. Like, school children stop what they're doing. Everybody does this when he dies. And you realize like, oh, that would be what happens when like, one of these, like when Jeff Bezos goes, like a lot of people are going to freak out, and stuff like that. Like that's the reaction we're getting from it. And I love how they skip over what the book takes chapters to do is somebody that nobody ever remembers figured out the first door. And then from there, nobody's been able to, do this thing. Cause the first challenge is this big race and da-da-da. But before we get into that, I want to get your thoughts on Rylance and Halliday and how that goes. Cause that's the one part of this that I still don't think works. And it's part that when it comes on, I just kind of cringe.
Yeah, definitely when Halliday comes on, I'm like, okay, so he's like some like on the spectrum, like Asperger, like autistic, like savant when it comes to like pop culture and video games. I think it's interesting how, I don't know if it's really established in the movie, but I've gathered this from watching all these films. Like this VR is not only free, it extends to everyone, but it's like a working economy. Yeah. Like this is like, it's like almost, well, I don't want to say it's like the Matrix, but it's like, it's just this working economy that now I don't understand like how the real world economy factors into this, and that's not important.
Well, and I can tell you that they don't do it in the movie. In the book, there's a pretty decent bit of explanation about it. And imagine if you could go to work, but instead, and this is not hard to imagine anymore after the last year we've all just lived through, but if you go to work, but you don't really go anywhere, you go online and you do your job, and the coin that you earn is a cryptocurrency that just translates back here, because the world we live in now is one where like nuclear devastation has happened and this is everybody has left. So the idea that like the dollar versus the yen doesn't really matter anymore. It's all about your coin.
Yeah, just
Bitcoin, I'm like, well, that's Bitcoin or Dogecoin, whatever you want to say, took over. And that's how it all works together. That's how it's supposed to do. They don't explain that in the movie. And I'll be honest with you, Mike, I'm kind of glad they don't go into it, because the book, like, it's long passages about it. I'm like, Ernest Cline doesn't know anything about economics, and that's okay, because he doesn't need to pass that idea off. But the idea is that if you imagine a world where you go to school, you go to work, but you don't really go anywhere, you put a headset on. And that's a much bigger part of the book, is that like the schools you go to are on these virtual planets. And just like schools in real life, if you're not really rich, you go to the crappy planet to go to school, and that's where Wade is.
Which is a bizarre thing to even think about in a virtual world, but
the socioeconomic racism would still exist
in a virtual, yeah, and also I bring up the whole working economy bit because that we will get back to that point at the very end when the Spielberg schmaltz comes in full swing.
It does come in heavy at the end. Yes,
but I am going with the character. I just watched Trial of Chicago 7, so I'm like, oh, that's the lawyer. That's and then Dunkirk. You know, he's a character actor that I've seen before, but now for some reason I'm just starting to recognize him. So I'm like, oh, okay. And then I looked up everyone on the IMDb because I'm like, these are like filled with like, oh, that guy. And I was looking up where I've seen everyone. But yeah, I'm going with it. You know, especially. I'm not just hating on. I don't want to just make it seem like I'm hating on the movie. Like I'm trying to give it its fair shot. I'm trying to see the world building that they're going into. But yeah, and like I said, I really like that opening segment of showing like this crappy. Are they in Columbus?
They're in Columbus, Ohio. Yeah,
Columbus. Seeing the images of the stacks, like that's a really unique visual. Like these cities that are just like shackled together, like literally. It kind of reminds me of another like Blade Runner almost.
Yeah. Just a dirtier version.
Yeah, an inadvertent homage, not a ripoff, a homage. Yeah. And but no, I'm going with it. I do, and I am liking Wade. You know, I think I like how he's moving around. I like the exposition. Like it's just very naturalistic. I'm like, oh, okay. Like it doesn't seem forced, whatever this exposition. Because that's another problem I have with voiceover exposition dumps. It just is like it's just forced. You know, it's just economic. Get it out. Get it out there. This seems more like okay. Like it's almost like he's teaching a history class of like this is what happened. This is the context. And I don't know if. I mean, I don't know if that really matters, but it felt okay to me. I was going with it, other than just wow, this is a lot of information. Should I be taking notes?
Yeah. You almost feel like you should. And Ty Sheridan is somebody I recognize him. He played the reboot X-Men film series. He was Cyclops in that, and I was like, he looks like a young James Martin. I can go for that. And he's got a real easy presence to him. He's fun, and he's allowed to be a teenager, but that's trying to grow up and has nowhere to go. And all he does is just obsess about escaping his life into this and trying to win this contest. Right. But you also realize like he tells you like my parents didn't make it out of those wars, out of the bad times. So I live with my aunt and her string of loser boyfriends. And mostly I just try to ignore it. In the book, it's a lot deeper. Like he has to sleep on top of the washer and not make noise. And it's even worse than what they show in the, redneck hell that he's a part of now.
Yeah, it feels like this world's like almost like the Mad Max world, whereas Mad Max, like Mad Max, especially like Fear Rib, that's taking place in Australia, like all the way down on the other side, and then this is taking place in like the United States. Australia, the hellhole that it is. And then this is like the inverse of that. We get the desert, like the boonies, the outback, and now we have civilization how do you explain the free Wi-Fi in this apocalyptic world? Whatever.
Well, it's one of those things that like after he references something called the bandwidth wars, which is hilarious. I'm like in the corn syrup drought, and I'm like, okay, we've lived through a lot apparently.
Yeah, and the gas wars and the water wars.
But you're hearing him say this, and you're like, well, this isn't terribly far away from like stuff you can see that we might be dealing with at some point. But it sets us in a place, and again, I think that it does a more streamlined version of the way the book does it. I'm glad you brought up Wade. I like Wade. He's got an online presence. Of course, he doesn't go by Wade in the Oasis. Nobody does. He goes by Parzival, the knight that found the Grail on his own. That's kind of his thing. And I love that he has like relationships inside the Oasis, right? He's got H, which is, it's kind of when it came in the book, like I was like, they're about to tell me that this is actually a non-male. This is going to be a female and that's playing this tough badass in this Oasis area. And it feels telegraphed, and it's almost it's just sort of obvious from the beginning, but I like Lena Waithe and Ty Sheridan. I think they have good chemistry together. They're fun together. You can tell they work well together, and they're kind of picking on each other like buddies do in this opening race thing. And I love that they come up, because the first challenge in the book, man, is like you have to play a game of some video game,
it's something
Slayer, something like that. You have to play a game. Joust is what it is. I'm sorry. And you have to play a perfect game of Joust, and Wade figures out if you use the other controller, it's easier. I don't know. It's really complicated. And then they have this thing called Flick Sync or Film Sync, where you can virtually step into any role of any movie ever made. And if you can 100% complete it, like you get so many coins for it. But in this case, it's part of he has to redo like War Games or something.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, there's no way to do that. So the fact that they made it a big race through not New York City, but pretty much was, with all of like Godzilla, King Kong, and all this other shit flying out at you, and nobody can ever complete it. I had fun in that opening sequence with that. And the fact that Wade is so he's poor enough that he doesn't have coin to fill up his car, his virtual DeLorean, as it were. So he has to stay in the back for other cars that crash. And when you crash out, you lose all your coin. You literally lose everything you've got. So your money in the real world is tied into the Oasis. So somewhere along the way, some government made that decision, and every government fall in line. And I just have to kind of accept that and go, okay, fine. That's what she's like. You're picking up trash on the street, basically, as somebody digitally disappears in front of you. And then
I'll be in the back. I'll be picking up trash all day.
You know what? Hey, I'm like, I like the strategy. First, you let all the suckers get knocked out of the way by all that other
pawns
crap,
go first,
and you can see what's in front of you, because H is driving Bigfoot, so she's got some room to grow in that. But Wade's in the back. I like the first race though. I think it's cool because it puts us in this world of what Halliday's trying to get people to do. And I think you figure out real quick that these solves for these puzzles are going to be having to look at it from the side, or look at it, differently than straight through. It's never going to be easy, right? He even says it in the setup, like, this ain't going to be easy. They're right under a rock. You got to go find them at the end of a maze inside of my brain or whatever. And which means that's an homage to the book. In the book, you have to know an insane amount about Halliday to be able to even play in these things. And Wade knows stuff about him the way that it's almost scary, the level of detail he knows about this person, because he doesn't know anything about himself. And I think that's part of the journey of it. And I'm glad they played that down a little bit in the movie, because that would be really off-putting, because he's so likable as a presence. But when you find out all he's really got is what he knows about James Halliday. And it's kind of sad, but they played that at the end with that after the big wreck, he hooks up with, or doesn't hook up with, he meets Artemis, this girl. And I love how he describes her as, I imagine her as the really popular Twitch TV channel, and her legacy on the Oasis is she screws up all of the corporate runners as they're going along. She'll wreck them instead of them winning, just to make sure they don't get a piece. And we find out later why, but I love that she kind of calls him out on all of his Halliday geekiness, and that he really needs to think about something else too.
Yeah. And especially when you see the relation, the one thing I want to hit on too, you see the relationship with H and Artemis, that is one thing that there's no way this is Spielberg did this, because I think that this movie, this idea that you can have friends in this virtual world, true friends, I think that especially of Spielberg's generation, that's something that he won't understand. This idea that oh, you've never met these people and they're your friends, the human connection through video games. Now, me personally, I've never had friends that I've never, well, I say that, but I would say
Mike, you host a podcast with people that you've never seen.
Let's say specifically video game. I at least we're on Zoom. I'm looking at your face. I know what you look like. So it's a virtual, but video games, all you have is their voice, and there's you're transcending all the superficial nature of what they look like, who they are, race, creed, religion, all you're transcending all of that.
Well, you are, but what you also realize, and Wade says it early, is that everybody's putting on an avatar, and that's not who they really are.
Oh, yeah.
They're just trying to put forth a front. He's trying to look cool and kind of, I don't know, this Buckaroo Banzai Marty McFly thing. Yeah, that's what he's got going on. And H looks like, the top half of Goro mixed with a Transformer. Like you're just, which either that's the point is you can be anything you want. Like Marvin the Martian kind of runs through in a scene. And I'm like, yes, I would be Marvin because I love that character. Like you can be whatever you, but my pick on that is, you tell me there's only one Freddy Krueger in the Oasis? Like, how do you differentiate between if you want to be Batman? Like, which version are you? How do you know you're not somebody else's Batman? That's one of the little flaws of the thing, and they don't explain it in the book. They don't explain it in the movie here either.
Well, it's funny too because like when you see like this world, like this exists. I think it's called VR World, and there's actually YouTube channels where that anonymity like comes into play. It's kind of like a Humans of New York type thing, but it's like Humans of the VR. And this guy sits down and interviews people through the virtual reality. So like the most popular ones that I liked watching was he was talking with vets, like military veterans. He was talking to one guy who was an AC-130 gunship and just like the hell that was. He's talked to, special operations guys. He's talked to like just boots on the ground, like the atrocity and like their struggle with PTSD. And where this is interesting is because they're talking about these like awful events that they've gone through. Meanwhile, their avatars are like Kermit the Frog or like Indiana Jones or like a penguin or something. And or like Woody from Toy Story. And you're sitting there watching this cute little penguin talk about how he was forced to blow up a building that was filled with civilians because there were terrorists at the top of the building. And it's like, how am I supposed to feel about this? And I mean, you get over that like initial, like, I'm watching Kermit the Frog talk about like committing war crimes, like inadvertently. But like this world exists and it's like that front, but everyone knows that it's an avatar. Like you're more than likely, like that's not it. So it's not a secret, so people can overlook that and they can just understand the personality of who they are, or even like who these people. It's a game show now too on Netflix, The Circle or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you hit on it. It is that it strips away all the superficiality by laying on another level of superficiality, but one where everybody can be just as superficial as each other, as long as you can maintain the coin for it, right? Like that's the whole thing. So you can tell people still run in packs, and they talk about how like there are groups of these hunters that get together and they clan up, and that it's like, oh, we're not going to do that. We're not going to, it's almost like, the GDIs versus the fraternities or something when you're in school. And I get that, I understand that, but I think everybody can relate to that. What I think is neat is that the relationship dynamic that forms, because Wade, or Parzival as it is obsessed with Artemis, like in a seriously almost twisted way. Like he is a super fanboy of hers, and getting to talk to her, and she actually gives him the time of day, is neat. And, once she kind of quizzes him and you can tell she's just flirting and playing with him, she also, you realize there's a lot more going on for her. And I think her arc is neat because what we'll find out in a minute, we didn't talk about it in the plot summary. She's part of like a resistance movement against IOI and the corporatization of the Oasis, and the fact that, it's not about becoming rich and famous, dummy. It's about kind of unlocking this for everybody so we can all live a little more equally. And I don't know. I think it's aided by the fact that Olivia Cooke is a very talented actor and can deliver those lines and make you believe all that. And you look past the Cyndi Lauper digital thing she's got going on screen, and you're her. And I think what helped me was I did know going into it, because my thought was like, man, if this is all CGI, I don't know if I can stand this. If I'm watching Jar Jar Binks talk to himself for 2 hours, and I found out they mocapped all of it, I'm like, okay, if you're digitally compositing the background, but that's the actual actor face moving, doing all of that stuff, and then you just animate them, I can live with that, because I realize that's somebody giving a performance. And it's just being rendered differently than me seeing them in person, but it's no different than them putting on a lot of kabuki makeup and doing, Gilbert and Sullivan or something like that on a stage. It's the same. It's the same idea. So I like the setup of it. I like the fact that H is like so technically advanced and can fix anything. You have all these people, and I like that they immediately set up that corporation as the bad guy. And I described him in the plot summary as a goon. Ben Mendelsohn is such a corporate goon, and he's like perfect for it, man. It's every evil businessman construct come to life you could ever think of. And I think he just got this and said, I'm just going to have a lot of fun and chew this up, and I get to be in a Spielberg movie before he dies.
Yeah, it's a perfect amount of camp that you're like, he's not taking it like super seriously, but he's able to pull it off. And it's a perfect performance, especially for like a movie where everything takes place in a video game. And that's the other thing I want to say about the animation, because I thought it was going to be disjointed and just kind of like going back and forth between the virtual reality world and the real world. But animation's top notch, and it's like just cartoony enough that you're like, okay, yeah, it's a video game. So the context of everything, it makes sense, and you run with it. It like the uncanny valley is a little bit there, but you're like, oh, it's a video game. Especially if you play a lot of video games, like the uncanny valley is just all over the place. But you turn your brain off because it doesn't, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you watch Rogue One, Star Wars, and you see CGI Tarkin, and speaking of our villain here, you see Tarkin, and you're like, that doesn't look right. Like this doesn't feel right. Or you see Leia at the end of it, you're like, this doesn't, like, it looks both amazing and awful at the same time. You're like, man, this is weird. But in this version, like, Tarkin could have shown up here and it would have looked just fine. Because
I think it's the situation that they're in. Like, they're trying to recreate a person that we all know really existed and give us Peter Cushing and Carrie Fisher back in those roles because they didn't want to recast it because they don't have to anymore. Like they just put those people over the top of them and they got the voice acting right. The reason it's different here is everybody's being something that they're not.
Yeah.
And you just kind of go with it, right? Versus being, like, if somebody showed up looking like Princess Leia, you'd be like, okay, yeah, they're cosplaying in a lot of ways. And you just kind of go with it. I have friends that do cosplay, and I think that's amazing if you're into that. And some of them get really good at it. And then there's some you're like, well, you're wearing the outfit, go for it. Be your best, whatever you are for the day. And that's fine. But I don't know. I think that's the difference between what Rogue One tried to do, which is, it's the worst part of Rogue One, which is an awesome movie, by the way. And maybe we'll talk about that one someday, versus what they're doing here. But back to Sorrento and his squad, what I love is that this corporation has hired all these like young people, these kids who are Wade's age and Samantha's age, Artemis's age, to study Halliday on such a way that they can churn out information about him to try to figure out the clues. Like that seems like the kind of thing that like a company like Deloitte would do. Like they would hire all these kids to come be consultants for them to tell them how to make our app work better. And I mean, I see that every day. Like companies do that stuff. And so it wasn't that far fetched to believe that there would be a corporation trying to do something like that.
Yeah. And one thing that I kept thinking, because I really liked how they hired the young people, the pop culture whizzes and the experts to be the consultants. And the whole time I'm watching this movie, I'm like, damn, I am such a nerd. Because I was catching so many references in this movie. Like even this, like I started watching this with my girlfriend. We watched half of it and then it was just late. So we had to go, so we went to sleep and I finished on my own. But we were watching it. I'm like, oh, this is a Zemeckis cube. Oh, the holy hand grenade. Oh, there's the Jurassic Park a T-Rex. Oh, there's that. Oh, cool. Like literally that was coming out of my mouth every single time. Even and I felt both accomplished and like, oh man, what am I doing in my life? Like I love like the Zemeckis cube. When we'll get to that moment, but when the Zemeckis cube is used and then we get the little Back to the Future jingle, I'm like, oh, okay. And then but it's like things like that I'm like, okay, I'm such a nerd. And I'm not that I'm like at the level of this, but I was curious if you felt similar.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I'm sitting there going like, man, I've seen all of these movies, but that's what I'm saying. Like Klein wrote a book of all the stuff he was obsessed with as a kid growing up. And it's the same stuff that I was aware of, at least. I didn't, do some of it and wasn't into all of it, but I at least know what it is, And then, so everybody had something they could tie into when they're watching it. And to his credit, Spielberg, he wanted John Williams. He couldn't get him. Williams was busy. So he got Alan Silvestri to do the score. And he told Silvestri specifically, I want you to reference like Back to the Future, Jurassic Park. I want you to hit those beats when it happens. And Sylvester is like, isn't that going to be a little on the nose? He's like, yeah, that's the point. This whole movie is on the nose. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, but I think that's what it's for. Like, in some way, there's like too much stuff up there. So like, if you just pause the screen, you can count all the characters on it. But even if you don't catch it, if you just catch one or two, that's the point, is that there's something for everybody here. So it allows you to get into it. And I want to talk about that first challenge now, Mike.
Yeah, I was literally just about to ask, like, let's get to that first challenge.
Yes, exactly. So they, they run the race. It's a disaster. And Wade's like, nobody ever gets by Kong. There's got to be another way of doing it. So they go and the Halliday journals are like this big Oasis library of everything James Halliday ever thought, dreamed of. Apparently he cataloged all of it. And people didn't really hang out in there anymore because everybody had given up. It had been 5 years since he was dead. The hunt was cold, whatever. So Wade keeps going back and he keeps looking for something. And he decides that he wants to go back to the day that they decide to, I don't know, take the company public, or something's happening or whatever. And he's looking for any kind of clue he can get. And he earns an extra quarter from the curator, the butler, which, like, if you don't figure out that's the Simon Pegg character just by the voice alone, you're not paying attention to this movie. But that'll come into play later, and I'm going to talk about that. I feel like that is totally ripped off from Scott Pilgrim, but we'll come back to that. But he figures out, because Halliday says something about they're having an argument or whatever, and he's like, don't you wish you could just go backward really fast? And he's like, that's it, Eureka. And I'm like, if the solve to this is that he just puts that car in reverse, I might have a problem with this movie.
It was literally the first thing I thought of when he's like, no one gets through Kong. I'm like, oh, so you go backwards. You try. Right. It's literally the first thing I thought of was go backwards.
Yes, and I'm sitting there going, like, I'm sitting there crossing arms, like, I'm going to start yelling at a cloud now because this is not cool, until it actually happens. And then the way it's realized through all that animation and how cool you see all that destruction happening from a different point of view. Like, there's times when Kong is like pounding the cement and you think he's pounding the cars. What he's doing is looking for anything going beneath him that he can't get to. And it's a great idea. It's a great resolve to that first one, because again, it's way cooler than what's in the book. Like, there's no way to make what was in the book cool on a screen. If you read it, it's way more interesting. If you can imagine reading somebody playing Joust is interesting, but Klein does a pretty good job of doing that, of really getting into how it worked. But I like how Wade figures it out and gets to the end. And of course, he's just starstruck by all of it. And I love how afterward, like, he is exactly what an 18-year-old kid would do if you gave him $100,000. Like, you know how to handle that.
Like, that's a steal.
Exactly. Right? They're like, dude, don't do all that. And he buys like a new haptic suit and all that stuff. And people, I remember hearing that word, like, what the heck is a haptic? And then I realized, like, oh, it's on my phone, moron. And now, you can adjust those things and all that stuff. I'm like, well, this is not so far fetched. But anyway, I say all that stuff because I thought, if that's the solve to this challenge, this is lame, until I saw it. And then having seen it, I'm like, okay, that was actually kind of fun.
Oh yeah, it's definitely fun. But to believe, especially if, like, this is like, there have been conspiracies on Reddit that people solve within like 4 hours, like, or did they solve it with it quicker than 5 years? So to believe that, like, this is people's obsessions, that they literally have a division of nerds that are studying this. Like, you're telling me the solution is drive backwards? And I wish someone would have figured it out, and instead of like reversing, they actually like turned their car around and like drove straight, and then, oh, they hit the wall. Oh, someone already tried driving backwards. Like, that to me would have been like, oh, like, okay, someone tried going backwards, but they didn't go in reverse. Then I may have given that, because I've never, in a video game, I've never, like, driven in reverse. I've always spun the car around and just driven straight. So maybe that could have been a little bit, that may have been a little bit of a tweak, but either way, yeah, it's super fun. I love like, you see the framework. It's almost like a glitch when you fall through the ground and you just, like, you're looking up in a video game and you're like, oh, well, like, there's nothing down here. And, the T-Rex is sitting on a conveyor belt and it shoots up, and you're like seeing the inner framework of the design of the track. And yeah, I love that bit where Kong sees him and is like smashing, trying to get through, and he can't. And that's how you beat Kong. And I also love the moment where it's like, oh, an 18-year-old, like, with the money, but also oh, I told my friend, and then I told Artemis, or no, she saw me do it, so she figured it out. I told my best friend, who then told these two other people, or told this guy, and then he told his brother, and so now it's like we're the high five. That's like
that's
crew.
what they call them because they're the first 5 on the leaderboard or whatever, and they're all friends anyway, so they that's how they all sort of tag up together. What's neat about the next part is that you're given a clue at the end of each challenge to lead you to the next one, and it's usually a puzzle or a riddle or something, and they're not that dissimilar from the book. The books are a little longer and a little more, I don't know, they're written differently, but these work because they're a different set of challenges. And he's trying to figure out, like, taking a leap of faith, what could that be? And he deduces that it's like, okay, it's got to be, some big moment in his life. Like, what did you regret? And that's what he's trying to figure out. And through some help and stuff, he decides, like, oh, it could be the fact that he didn't go out with this girl this one time who turned out to be Morrow's wife later down the line or whatever, or it could be this and that. And the whole time, though, he has no idea that IOI has put all of its effort now into, we got to either destroy this guy or we have to get him on our side one way or the other, because most of them think that Sorrento doesn't give a damn, but the rest of the company's like, we need to buy this dude off and get him to come work for us because obviously he's the smartest person ever. And I'd liken that, Mike, being a sports fan, to like, that those NFL MVPs of the Super Bowl to get like that massive contract for the other team that they didn't play for, and then they never turn out to be again. Mm-hmm. It's exactly what IOI is trying to do here with old Wade after the end of that.
Yeah, and it's funny, like, because after that moment, Artemis saying, "Oh, you're well known now. Like, you have to like disguise yourself." And we get the whole bit of, like the Clark Kent, and like he has to wear the suit with the glasses, which I liked. But it's weird that, because immediately I was like, oh, like this big evil corporation that literally have multiple divisions of their, like they're setting people to figure out this, like, the Sixers or something, you don't think that they're going to come after you after getting on that leaderboard? Like, immediately I was like, you got to change your disguise. You got to change what you look like, man, because I knew that this company was going to go after you. And this is, I don't know if I said this in the beginning of this discussion, this movie is entirely predictable. Like from the first, like the moment we enter this world, you can predict everything that's going to happen. The first frame, you see the stacks, and you know exactly how this movie's going to end. Yeah, which is fine, but it's just frustrating. You're like, and maybe that just goes into the naivete of an 18-year-old that is now a super mega star. Like, he's surpassed Artemis as like he's the new like Twitch big gamer, and like that fame is like it kind of clouds his judgment of, oh, the big evil corporation that's been literally devoting all of their time and effort to beat this challenge. Like, oh, they're over there. I got the one up on them. Like, I was like, they're gonna go after you, buddy. You better start hiding.
And I mean, he's got several things going on at the same time too. You've got Sorrento bribing these, bounty hunters in the Oasis. That's where TJ Miller shows up as IROC, which is hilarious because he does all of his humor. Like, can you stand over here? I've got this neck problem. I can't.
That shouldn't work, but it does.
It does. And oddly enough, like, you think like that is not going to land. Like the first joke, you're like, uh-oh. And then the second one, you're like, actually, this kind of goes, this is okay. It's sort of like him in the Deadpool movies, which are not good movies, but he's fine in them, with how it works out. It's like, okay, I could go with that. But I love how Wade is trying to figure this out, and he figures out that, like, okay, Halliday once dated Morrow's wife. It's got to be something about, he was going to take her dancing. He's looking for clues. So he and Artemis go to this club together. He agrees to meet her there, and they have a little dance off or whatever. And Wade does the classic, like, too much at once for the girl. You're infatuated with your dream girl. You get her to go out with you, and he's just like, I'm in love with you. I've always been in love with you.
Yeah,
of course, she does the natural reaction. Even in virtual reality world, guys, that doesn't work. Play it slow, okay? Because she's like
weirdly sexual. This scene,
I mean, part of it is, and this is not me blaming anybody, she starts messing with him a little bit. She's like, what kind of suit are you wearing? And she starts rubbing herself on him, just to get him kind of off. But she's just messing with him. She's just trying to poke a little fun at him because she likes him and she clearly trusts him, but she's not infatuated with him, and she has no idea what he's about to lay on her. And she drops all of this on him and on her. And she's like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then he makes the big mistake. He gives her his name.
Yeah.
And that's when IOI sends in like their big goons. It's a big shootout. And then the Zemeckis cube, which is a great MacGuffin to get you out of a situation.
Yeah. It turns you back 60 seconds and you just use that now. But
yeah, exactly.
I did. I did like, I really like that little bit of the Zemeckis cube. So first I was like, how is it like we're gonna go back in time or something, like how's this gonna work? And then and then okay, let's get the hell out of here. And I went with it. I was like, especially in this video game world, I was like, and that's funny when they're like buying all this stuff, and we do get like, the first bit of like the nuke, where it's like, who would buy that? I don't know, people would just want stuff where it's like the capability of nuking and destroying every single avatar. You're like, it's like $2 billion or something. You're like, I'm like, oh, okay. Chekhov's gun here, but yeah, it's but so it's funny just seeing like these. Well, I guess they do set up like these items of power that people are fighting over. Like, oh yeah, I can see the Zemeckis cube being one of those
artifacts. They call them.
Artifacts.
They're like power-ups in a game. And I mean, you see that. And what you realize in this is that Wade has no idea what he's tapped into or the kind of power he actually has now. And Samantha kind of gives him a real reality check. I mean, she kicks his avatar and it knocks him off of his seat or his treadmill or whatever he's walking on to virtually move. And she puts it to him pretty quick that like, you think this is a game and it's just about fame and all this, like this company will not only kill you, they'll enslave you. And that's what you learn is that like her dad got into the cycle of trying to win and, got in debt. And then now he went to work in a loyalty center, which you talk about some dystopian, here's the underbelly where you realize the companies have taken over the government now as well, like debtors prisons used to be. It's, well, you'll just come here and you'll work. And the IOI version of that is you do work in the virtual world until you basically drop and they can't use you anymore. And then they send you back out. And I love that they put that in there because I got to tell you, in the book, it's very different how that plays out. I mean, her story is the same, but they actually ended up using that. Like they infiltrate the loyalty center as a way to undermine the whole thing. And they do that a little bit in the movie here, but not to the same level. And I like though that we raise the stakes and like she cuts him off at that point and won't have anything to do with him. And so he's out there trying to figure out that second challenge. Right. And I like that it resets Wade a little bit here because he's trying to figure out what to do. And that leads him to his first meeting with Sorrento, who offers him a boatload of money and all this stuff. But to Wade's credit, he wises up and realizes somebody's feeding this guy all this pop culture he's throwing at me. He's a poser. And I don't need to listen to him. I need to unhook and get out of this.
Which I did like that like he's throwing those clues in there. He's like, oh, we want to make every college or every high school like the one in Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller. He's like, oh yeah, like Faber College, and he's like, it's a trap. That's Animal House. Like, don't fall for it. And he's just, and he understand. And I do like those. Like that's when I think the references. There's something deeper to the references. It's not just like, oh, Faber College or I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm not that big of a nerd. I don't remember the high school that they went to, but they're not just name dropping these. It's actually like a mind game of just like, do you really know this or are you just getting fed lines and you're just bullshitting me? And I like how he picks that up, or even the moment where he's like, oh, we're going to give you, I like the temptation. It's like, we're going to give you however many millions of dollars and we'll get you in a penthouse. And he uses the emotion detachment stuff. And he has to take off his goggles and he's faint. And he's like, oh my God, that's more money than I can even imagine. As an 18-year-old kid would think that. But I love how he's smart enough to recognize, like, I'm about to have a panic attack from how much money he's offering me. And he's like, and then the villain Sorrento calls him out. He's like, you're probably using the artificial emotional detachment array technology. You're very smart. It's like, that's a lot of money. I love how he just comes back and is just super cool and calm.
Well, and I love how it comes to him too. Like, I can't fall in with these guys because the person I'm infatuated with, who I trust immensely, has told me like, these are not good. Plus, I've been racing against their goons forever. I know what you're all about. I'm not going to fall for it. And what's wild is that Sorrento, and this is when Ben Mendelsohn really shines, is he's like, I was hoping you would say no, because they made me pitch you the offer, but I knew you were going to reject it, because I want you to know nobody's going to remember you when you're dead in like 2 minutes or whatever. And that's when you realize Wade, it's like, my decisions have consequences beyond me. And we see the hit squad go out and blow the stacks up. And like you say, I think from the minute you see that first stack, you're like, one of those is falling down. Like, you just know. And they blow up the one his aunt lives in with her, boyfriend, and it falls over. And Wade is now officially an orphan again. And that, it sets the course forward, because now he gets picked up in a black van. You don't know what's happening. And the big reveal is that Samantha came to rescue him after all, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I wish that scene was played a little bit differently, where it's like, oh, well, Wade. Like, because if the audience knew that IOI knew Wade's name, I wish we didn't have that scene where they, like, the drones or whoever, like, picks up the name and they send it off. I wish that was excised and we just have that moment of, all right, Wade, we know where you are. And it's like, wait, you know my name? Because then we would be like, oh shit, they know his name, Like, it's Yeah, she totally knew who he was. And I take it as both he's a strong, valuable asset to this team. He broke the code that like hundreds of people being employed couldn't. He could see through something. Like, he has something that everyone else is lacking. So I took it as both like he's an extreme asset. He was also the first person to break this alone with no help. And also, like, she likes him. She as cold as she wants to appear, she does have some inkling of feelings towards him, which then brings up the whole bit where, like, when he says, I love you, and it's like, it's kind of what H said, where like they could just be like a 50-year-old dude who's living in their mom's basement in Detroit, where she says, like, you don't know what I look like, you won't like me. And he's like, I don't care. And then we see her, and she just has like a little, like a birthmark on her face, which to me, I was like, that's it. Like, I thought she was gonna be like severely deformed, or like an amputee, or like paralyzed or something. Like, which none of those, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But I can see how someone would be very self-conscious about that, and like not have the confidence, especially in this world where you could be whatever you want in the VR world. Like, you're trying to hide something that you perceive as a deficit, and then here it's just like, oh, like, she just has a little, which I can understand, like, people who have, birthmarks, they might want to hide that. They might be insecure about it, but it's just, I'm like, that's it. Like,
yeah, it is kind of thing
of like,
yeah. And the way they play it off, I'm like, you're still really pretty. It's not that big of a deal. Like, I don't know. That is a cheap part of it. Again, that's what I tell you. Like, this is the part where I start checking out on the movie. I'm like, oh, okay, let's just get on with it, please. And what's funny is though, like, right as they're about to, like, kiss, and just that big moment, right? I love how she's like, oh shit. Like, she realizes, like, the leap of faith was he should have kissed this one when he had the chance. So when would he have had that chance? What did they do on their first date? They watched a movie. So like Halliday had like the greatest letterbox page known to humankind, apparently, because they go to the journals to find it. And that leads us to the second challenge is like, what would be the worst date movie of any of these on the wall? And there's something in the riddle about like the creator hates what it creates. And they land on The Shining because, Stephen King hates the Stanley Kubrick movie to this day. And Spielberg is like BFFs with Kubrick, or was when Kubrick was alive. So it would be a fun thing for, if we're going to, this is not anything like this in the book, by the way. This is totally invented for the movie. And I happen to think nobody cops to it, but I'm like, I bet you Spielberg told Penn and Klein, like, you need to make that a Stanley Kubrick thing. You need to make that The Shining. And they create
100%.
Yes. That's what it is. And like he went to Kubrick's family and got like the blueprints for the Overlook, because we've talked about before on The Shining that like Stanley Kubrick didn't go shoot that in a hotel. He just built one.
Yeah. It's like a labyrinth, it's a deliberate labyrinth that doesn't make sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah. There's no architectural sense to it all, except it works in the movie.
Oh, so yeah.
They recreate the Overlook, and we go into that. And I got to say, like, when that music kicked on and all, I was like, oh, I can't wait to see this go down. And it goes down exactly like you think it would. There's the woman in the tub. There's all the blood out of the elevator shaft. It's all that crazy stuff to get to a point where they go to the ballroom where the dance is happening, which is not in The Shining, but it's actually in the book. But okay. And for that to be the moment is to kiss her when you're on the floor with her to dance. Like, I don't know. The resolve of that is, I didn't love it. And I like the fact that Samantha came up with it and like she figured it out. But I as much fun as it was to watch the Shining get redone for like half a minute, I was like, it's kind of lame.
Yes. So, I both love and hate the scene. More on like the latter, because like you said, this is like one of the only moments other than the live action that I feel like Spielberg is invested. And the devil's in the details. Like everyone has listened to me talk before, like they know I'm a stickler for the details, and they're here. You compare this to the first sequence, where to me it just feels like Spielberg is like, all right, throw King Kong in there, throw my T-Rex in there, throw this shit, like, oh yeah, it looks cool, like you got it, like just fix the lighting, yeah, whatever. Oh, it looks great. It's this big extravagant, and it does look great. Like, don't get me wrong, but it just feels very like in Star Wars. If you'll indulge me in this little, like the anecdote of when Yoda first fights, and Lucas wrote it in the screenplay as Yoda fights, and it's indescribable. No one's ever seen this before. And he says, all right, animators, go have fun. You're
talking about the best scene in Attack of the Clones, by the way.
Yeah. And even like Adam Savage has talked about that, where like the script notes were so vague, which is, like we said, he's enabling these creators to create these things, but he's getting all the credit. People I think have this assumption that, you look at a planet like Camino, or you look at something like this Yoda fight, and people I think have this perception of, oh, like George Lucas was there, like telling people how he moves and like what this planet looks like and what this and that. And like, no, these way more talented people, as I guess arguably a director does, he enables people to create this art, and then he like assembles, or he or she assembles it. But that's kind of what I felt like that first segment was have fun, guys. It looks great. The Shining sequence, on the other hand, is the inverse, where I feel like he was sitting there where he had like, and it's great. We have the original box art. Any other director for kids, like my generation, probably seen The Shining, but the next generation, maybe not so much. It's easy to put Jack Nicholson's face through the door and be like, oh, with The Shining, but they stuck with the original theatrical poster. And then you go in there and the moment you hear the bwom, 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 like I'm like, oh, hell yeah. You see the marquee, you go in, the doors open, and you have this beautiful rendition of the Overlook, like the writing room. Even, and like throughout the whole segment, we get the grain, the artificial grain of film when The Shining.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy shit.
It's like that part of the book where you play a role in a movie. They wanted to do that, and then Spielberg's like, oh, I got it, The Shining.
I have a rewrite which we'll get to after this, after we discuss the sequence, and then I'm going with it. I'm like, okay, I'm waiting to see what you do with this. We get like the timeline, which is kind of cool with the key, like the like all work no play, like screenplay is going through, and like, okay, we have 5 minutes, and the bit where it starts to lose me is I've never seen The Shining. I got to watch it through my through my closed hands, and like, you're telling me that people who are hunting for the eggs, like, or the Easter eggs, the keys, like, this is their livelihood, like, this is what they do. They've never seen The Shining because it's quote unquote too scary. And then we get down, oh, hey, little girls, like the way out of here. And then we get like the elevator, the river of blood, which was a kind of a really cool imagining because, you see that shot in the trailer and then there's never like, oh, well, what happens afterwards? You don't see this nightmare image, like how it like goes down the hallway. So we get that, we get the superimposed changing of the Jack Nicholson picture. And then, room 237. And that's where this starts to lose me, where we get a superimposed, like, oh, hey, naked lady, what's going on? And then she turns into this CGI, something that like Andy Muschietti would use in It.
Yeah.
And that's not scary. Like, that was never scary to me. And then it turns into her trying to stab him. He falls into the maze and it just turns into just like iconography, which isn't even like true iconography. She starts swinging at him with axes and you're like, I was just waiting for Jack Nicholson to show up, and then
well, I mean, there's an axe in that maze that come out. They show that with all the Sixers that are getting wasted in The Shining, later after this happens and stuff. The thing that gets me about it, Mike, that I hate is what the ultimate puzzle resolve is. Doesn't make any sense that it's a part of The Shining. So I want to hear what your rewrite is, because if you can make that work better, I'm all for it.
Yeah, well, yeah, and so it's like, oh, kiss the girl, take that leap of faith. And what's annoying is like, at the very end of the movie, what Holiday is most upset about isn't that he didn't get with the girl, it's that he lost his friendship with Ogden.
Yeah.
So you're like, what does this have to, like, how is this the second key if he's more upset about losing his friendship? So there's that. So my rewrite is you scrap it's not The Shining. We don't go to The Shining. We keep the idea that it's a movie. Like, this is clearly like the book, it was War Games. This film, they decided to use The Shining because he's such a fanboy of Kubrick and for some reason wanted to pay homage. And I think that's the irony, is like the clue is, oh, the creator hates the work or something, Stephen King hating the movie version of this. But I honest to God believe if Kubrick was still alive and he saw this, he would not be flattered that Spielberg did this. He would think I would say he thinks it's ridiculous, silly, childish, and a complete desecration of his work.
Let's make no mistake. If Stanley Kubrick was alive, this wouldn't have happened. Like, as much as he's friends with Steven, he would be like, no, like, you can't do
this
that.
Is
you know what he would have done? He was like, here, redo Eyes Wide Shut, because I'm probably still editing that movie at this point.
He was still editing The Shining.
Exactly. Yeah. So what would be your result? Because I'm with you. It doesn't make any sense how to tie those things together. Like, it should have been something about you're following a friend down a path or something like that, and then it opened up a gate for you or something. I don't know.
So my film, we still keep the movie theme. I say we use Back to the Future.
Oh.
And the Back to the Future, the whole key, like, you can use some like trite thing of like, oh, like going back in time to redo your mistakes, blah, 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 some trite bullshit that doesn't make any sense. Or just works in context of this. And the key is you have to drive the DeLorean, which we've established is his favorite car. Like, he loves Back to the Future, the Zemeckis Cube. Like, Back to the Future has been referenced. You have to drive the DeLorean and hit the pole when the lightning strike hits it. Now you might be able to answer this a little bit better than me. This has always stood out to me because you guys, at the time of this recording, like a few months ago, released the Back to the Future retrospective. Yeah. The thing that always stood out to me was when Marty is about to drive, Doc says, my calculations are correct. When the alarm clock goes off, you gun it, and that will all sync up. But if you remember in the movie, the DeLorean is stalling. It does, like, when that alarm goes off, Marty doesn't hit the gas because the car isn't on. So let's just say he waits 10 seconds and then he slaps the car and it turns on and then he guns it. So the calculations were incorrect. So that's where the whole thing, like, when the alarm goes off, you have to wait 10 seconds. And then that's when you gun it and you hit it, and then you get transported to the next where the key is. And if you need some more element of like chase, you can have Biff and his gang come in, and they're like the big boss.
I follow you on this, and I get you. Just real quick on the Back to the Future thing. The way that gets explained, the way I've always heard it, is that Marty's supposed to drive like increments of increasing his speed to get up to the 88 to hit that pole. Well, because he's late, he just guns it the whole way and says, screw it. And like, because when you hit 88 in that DeLorean, this is a total diversion here, all that sparky stuff starts happening, right? That would have been really distracting in 1955. So Doc's trying to keep a low profile. He wanted him to hit it right at the moment. Well, Marty hit it a few minutes earlier because he was late. That's what that is. But I like your rewrite. I like that idea. It's a better move to get where we're going anyway. And Samantha figures that out. Of course, they've all seen it, the high five. So they do it. And now everybody's seen it because everything you do, by the way, is broadcast 24/7. And so Scream 4 guy's life has, now has meaning. And so the Sixers are trying to follow up. They're just trying to get through the Shining Maze too. And they zero in and figure out where they're transmitting from. And they do the raid on Samantha's compound. And she calls in a favor and throws Wade in the back of a van. He has no idea what's about to happen. And she says, you'll forgive me for this, I promise. And she gives herself up, which I think is huge because she knows what's about to happen. She's getting sent to a loyalty center, which is like her personal hell. That's where her
But was
dad
that part
died.
of her plan?
Well, you see, the thing is, in the book, Wade like purposely goes to work at one of them with like a alternate identity so he can undermine it and get her out of it. But apparently her plan was just to get him away because that's when H enters in and we realize H is a girl who drives her dad's big postal van, and that's where she streams from and all this stuff. So, and I think he meets Daito and Sho at that point too, as real people, which in the book they're brothers and here they're just different, Asian nationalities, which is fun.
Aren't they like, they're Japanese, but they're like Asian stereotypes of Japanese?
I think one's Japanese and one's either Chinese or Korean. So.
Well, in the book, right?
Yeah. I think. Well, but I even think of the movie. I think that's how it's done. But either way, like, yeah, they're two different kind of ninjas, basically. But whatever, be what you want to be in the Oasis, Wade. But these guys are doing this. And the whole point is so you can get Wade with other people that he trusts. But now he's got a reason to, okay, we got to figure out how to break Sam out. And we got to solve the third thing before the Sixers do. Because what you realize is that IOI is planning all of a sudden. They know the final thing is on Planet Doom. They figured that out through, everybody's kind of on the same page for that. And they are setting up all these bombs around to, blow up the bridge, mess the whole thing up so nobody else can get nearby. And good old Wade realizes, you know what? The way we can do this is we got to take it to them. And I got to say, like, I love the sequence of the we're not going to take it on Planet Doom and all hell breaking loose. Because this is every 80s rebellious teen movie. We're going to go and we're going to fight. It's Streets of Fire. It's all that crap. And I liked it, man. I thought it was fun. I like the fact that there's a Chucky bomb that you can throw the Chucky doll at somebody.
Yeah, we get the one.
We get the one F-bomb because it's a PG-13 movie. They saved that for the perfect time, which I think is great. And I like all of that. And I like the fact that the whole point is that they realize we got to guess Halliday's favorite Atari game, which that would not be knowledge. I think would be hard to find. But again, like if you start going like, well, wouldn't everybody know that? Yeah, they probably would. But to get to this point, look at the hell you've had to go through to get to that. So the thing is, though, is that everybody's they're playing every game, and as they play, they fall through this iceberg. All that's going on while the battle's going on. Wade and you got the Iron Giant. There's so much crap that goes on here that it's almost like too much. It becomes
even like modern video. You get Master Chief, you get the Overwatch characters, and I'm not a fan of any of those. But I was waiting for like Fortnite characters to come in here too.
I think I think that had existed on the level it does now, it would have definitely made an appearance in this. But I don't think it was around, or if it was, it wasn't as popular.
I think it was like just starting. But
there are Minecraft sheep though running across that. There's all the Call of Duty people.
Oh my god!
There's all that crap, dude. There's so much crap in there, but it's almost too much. It's like the battles in Revenge of the Sith. It's like there's so much shit on the screen. I can't possibly pay attention to any of it. Where are the characters I'm trying to watch? And what I'll give credit for this movie for Spielberg is the cameras don't leave the people that you're supposed to be paying attention to. And they get to use all their cool gadgets and shit to get Wade to that point. That's the whole point is we got to get him to that end. And then Sorrento does what every bad guy does. And this is what I'll give this movie credit for, is when you have like a big nuke and you just threaten with it all the time, I hate you because you don't have the balls to do something with it. And he actually sets the thing off. And I'm like, you know what? I'll give you credit. You decided to wipe out everybody. If I can't have it, no one can. And
I love TJ Miller. He's like, wait, you're serious? Like, I got a lot of stuff in here, man. I don't, and I love when he blows up and it's like literally all of his treasure is just decimated. But yeah, I do love how he's like, yeah, I'm going to use this because I can buy myself back into this. It doesn't matter. And when that bomb goes off, it's like pretty devastating. You know, it's like the Call of Duty nuke where, I mean, like in that game I think it was, I don't even know.
It's Modern Warfare at the very end of Modern Warfare. The American guy.
When the bomb goes off, like in multiplayer, just like the screen just goes black. But like this, you just see like everyone just exploding, and they're like, and you can't run from it because it's everyone in the Oasis. It's not just like 100 square mile. It's everyone. It's
everyone on Planet Doom. You zeroed out every avatar on that planet, which that's thousands of people that you just essentially zeroed their account to, including all of your own people.
Yeah.
Like that's, I mean, and the IOI, you figure like they had a way of backing that up to fix it, but it screws up, but it gives the idea of, oh, I've got an extra life. And I'm like, man, that is ripped out of Scott Pilgrim. And I love it at the end of Scott Pilgrim. That's an underappreciated little film.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, which has its own life and its own graphic novel series and is even better on that medium, I think, than what they did in the movie. But I'm like, of course, that extra quarter would come in. And then when you start to unravel that, the problem with that I have, Mike, is that so his partner gave you that. Like gave you, specifically you, Wade, that, and he's never given anybody else one of those because nobody's gotten that. What is it about you that makes you so damn special all of a sudden?
Yeah, it's bizarre.
I don't know that they paid that off enough. You know, I mean, it was, but I like the idea that like the ultimate resolve is to find the original Easter egg. That's the same as in the book, and I like that. I was like, that's it's kind of a sweet thing. It's like you don't play always to win and dominate. You play just to play and live. You know, that was what they dreamed up the Oasis for, was to give people a better life or a better chance at life, as it were. And the fact that that's the resolve is, it's kind of neat. What did you make of the fact that there's one more test though, too, that Halliday's avatar has him like, make sure you sign these personal documents. And he's like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like you.
It just reminded me of like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, you know?
Yes.
You're just like, one more test. I mean, I guess it makes sense because like, but it's weird. It's like, I just got to be sure. Well, I guess that was a failsafe because he knew corporations were going to come in and not see through that facade. And it's just like, well, you're not. It's like the Indiana Jones, like, yeah, he chose poorly, which I was surprised that night wasn't there. But I mean, I went with it. I don't think I have to admit I didn't see that immediately, but I like that detail of I was like, wait a minute, because he picks up the pen. He's like, wait a minute, this isn't right. It's like the final test of just like, oh, this person, whoever is standing before me, truly is worthy of being here. He's not just some bigwig corporation that essentially, I don't want to say cheated, but cheated their way to get here.
Yeah.
And I want someone that actually is worthy of owning the stock of being here. I'm curious to see what would have happened if he actually signed the paper.
I know, right? Does that
would he have been zeroed? That's why I almost wish someone was there. Like I wish Sorrento was in there, be like, get the hell out of the way, kid, I'm here first. And then he just like explodes,
right.
like another another 80s Indiana Jones reference. Oh, he chose poorly.
Yeah, something like that, or open up the ark and all those guys melting down. You wish there would have been something, but it did seem very Willy Wonka, but
it's like, you've won.
The thing that it leads to is you go into, and what's amazing is, and you have to, like, this movie has so many conceits you have to give it. And one thing I read in a lot of reviews is like, why would Halliday recreate his childhood bedroom? And I'm like, if the dude can make all this other stuff, of course he would do something like that. You just have to go with that. But what I will give credit for is that Halliday has regrets in his life, and he wants whoever controls this now, Wade, in this point, to do what you want with it. It's yours, but don't do what I did. Like, you had to basically worship me to get to this point, but I would rather you not be me. and that's a little different from the book, but it's similar tone. Is that Wade kind of comes to realize that what he had to do to get to this point really wasn't living, and he's ready to live his own life now. And that's why I like the end when they decide, they divided up 5 ways and yada yada, and they keep Ogden Morrow around to tell him what the hell to do for a quarter a year or whatever, because he don't need the money. And they arrest everybody. There's all that stuff going on. And that they shut the Oasis off Tuesdays and Thursdays because you need to go out and smell the flowers. My only thing to that is like, wait a minute, the world sucks, man. Like, what are people supposed to do?
It's easy for a kid, an 18-year-old kid who has no responsibility, living with this beautiful girl, making out on Tuesdays and Thursdays in this big penthouse overlooking the poor people. And then that's the other thing.
Exactly.
Like, they shut the economy down for 2 days, weekdays. And like, that's how people make their living. That's how people like go to school. That's like, this is like, it's not just a video game. It's an integral part. It's like shutting Wall Street down for 2 days every week. You're just
right.
Like, you can't do that. You're like decimating the entire world's economy. It's not just like the United States, it's the world's economy is being shut down for 2 days so you can go outside and breathe toxic waste. And that's like where the schmaltz, the Spielberg schmaltz comes in. You're like, I understand you want to end your movie on a happy note, and especially from someone of his generation, like, put down the games, put down your phones, go live your life. I get that, but in the context of this movie, it makes zero sense.
Well, and I'll tell you, it is a totally Spielberg schmaltz thing because the book doesn't end like that. In the book, Samantha and Wade don't meet until the very end in person. They don't meet until the very end, and when they do, they kiss, and that's the end of the book. And
I kind of like that.
I like it too. It's a lot better. I mean, because what it does though is there's never they smashed that to the middle of this movie because they felt like they needed to get that reveal done because that wasn't going to be the end. Because Spielberg had said like, no, we're going to schmaltz the end of that. I'm sure that's not what he said, but somebody in a writer's room was like, we're schmaltzing the hell out. Because that's what he's doing. I mean, that's exactly what they've done here, and I don't know. I mean, on some level, it's kind of a sweet ending, but it's almost too sweet. It's too sugary sweet. And it's one of the times I'll credit the book being better than the movie in this case is that ending is a lot better. If they had never met, if she could have orchestrated his escape and rescue and all that other stuff. And he's met H and all these other people. He could have done all that and not met her until the very end. Like she walks out from behind, a bus or something like that. And they see each other and they just know like that would have been schmaltzy, but I think that would have been more earned than what we got here in the end. Cause in the end, it's almost too good. And then I agree with you. Yes. Let's wreck the world economy just because we want to teach people to go back outside. That doesn't help. Like that didn't fix anything. Did you take your $500 trillion and fix everything? I mean, that's the other question you have to ask.
Yeah, and it's just weird because the whole movie, like, they're showing that people are having these relationships in virtual, like, genuine human connection I guess they meet each other, but for the first, like, half the movie, they don't meet each other in real life. They're just meeting through this game. And I think that it's almost it's validating like what people are doing in real life. Like I mentioned, like I've never had those relationships through like video games, like people I've met online randomly and then like claned up with them and just like started playing with them. I have buddies that have done that, even to the point where we'll be playing and then they'll come in and they're like, oh, what's up, Ben? What's up, John? And when my one buddy got married, they couldn't make the wedding, but they made the bachelor party, and that was the first time they met. And that's like it's interesting. It's very unique because that hasn't happened anywhere else. It's like the new version of a pen pal, except it's more personalized and you actually feel like these people. And that's where they met for the first time, was my buddy's bachelor party. And that was like so like totally unique that I feel like this movie is like both championing, and then at the very end is like, turn off your video games, just go get a girlfriend, go get a boyfriend, actually meet and touch people. And it just feels like such a a boomer sentimentality.
It is very much a boomer, like, turn off your phone, kids. It's what David Fincher does at the end of friggin' Facebook movie too, the social network. It's a Gen Xer is like, screw that social media crap, kid. Go outside and pet a cow or whatever. You just stop refreshing your ex-girlfriend's page for her to friend you. You know, I mean, it's the same kind of mentality. And I don't want to say it ruins the ending. It's just, you just realize, like, oh, that's the ending we're going to get. We're going to use Spielberg schmaltz number 3. It's vintaged for 40 years, kids. We've done this, so we shouldn't act surprised. We're at the part of the podcast, Mike, where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. Really curious to hear what yours are for Ready Player One.
Yeah, I kind of showed my hand a little bit when we first started this conversation like an hour and a half ago. And you know, my first impressions were I didn't hate the movie, but I didn't love it either. I had very low expectations going in, and it exceeded my expectations, but that's not really hard to do when the bar was so low. It's next to like dinosaur bones. But so it's a fun movie. I'll give it that. Like, the animation looks great. I think it's accessible to a lot of people. Again, Spielberg. It's very contemporary Spielberg. It's a very competently made movie. I love all the animation to it. I love that the effects artists are getting credit for what they're doing in films like this and projects like this. I think like this is a film that I think actually is pushing the bounds of animation, you know, something akin to like what Avatar did in like 2009 or 10, whenever that came out. Like, this is like kind of that new style, that new era of animation. And again, like, people can become animators and make movies like this. You know, they can do it as long as they have a decent setup at their home. They can do they can do all of this. And I think that's very empowering. But yeah, that's Spielberg schmaltz and all that other stuff that I was just like, I could do without. The references are like, yeah, I guess it's fun. It's a fun movie, so I'm gonna give it a medium popcorn. It's a very lukewarm recommendation. Like, I'll probably return to it, but probably get it on DVD if it's in like a $5 bin. But I'm not gonna get this on like ultra 4K, ultra edition, like whatever. You know, I'm not gonna shell out all that money for it. But if it's in a $5 to $10 bin at Best Buy or Walmart, yeah, sure, I'll pick it up.
I want to say that this is an upgrade of experience from the book as a movie for me, except for the ending. I do like the ending of the book better. But as far as just an experience of going through, for me personally, I told you, I thought the book was kind of trashy. It just really meandered and was just too geeked out on its own references. The movie streamlined all of that, and it's cast well enough that the characters really carries through. We really talk about like Lena Waithe. She's hilarious as age in this and really carries a lot of the good comedy. And Mendelsohn's great. Olivia Cook's brilliant. And Ty Sheridan's a good actor. Like, you can tell he knows what he's doing. And so they're likable they're likable actors, even when the characters aren't so relatable or likable and they make dumb decisions, as they're wont to do in these kind of movies. The spectacle of it is mind-numbing in a lot of ways, because you, like I say, you can get lost in trying to figure out what's that from. And I think the point is that there's so much up there that everybody can connect to it. The problem is that can be really overwhelming sometimes when you're watching this. And in the second act of the movie, until Wade gets captured, it takes a dip. Like, there's a part of it where it's just not working. Like, in the whole second challenge, I agree with you. While it's neat to see the homage to The Shining, it doesn't really make any sense as to why it's there, and it doesn't really work. All of that said, as a sum total, though, it is a fun experience to watch this movie. Like, if you just sort of sit back and just let it wash over you, it's not going to ask you to do a lot. It's going to help you through the whole way. It's going to hold your hand the whole way. And at the end of it, you're going to get exactly what you wanted out of it, even though you saw it coming 20 minutes earlier. And that can be a fun experience, you know, along the way. It's not a terribly rewarding one, but sometimes you don't need to watch The Third Man. You know, you need to watch Ready Player One. And this movie delivers on that level. I think it got unfairly hated on a little bit in reviews and things, because it wasn't up to the quote Spielberg standard. And I'm like, anybody that says that doesn't really pay attention to all the stuff that guy's done. Because sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it's just kind of there. Like it's not every album's friggin' Abbey Road, you know. Sometimes they're just okay, you know. And this movie is in a lot of ways mostly okay, and it's a fun watch, and it's one that I go back to. I don't know. It'd been a year or so since I had seen it, and I'll probably watch it maybe once a year because I'll get in the mood where I'm like, I just want to throw that on, and it'll just kind of be big and flashy and fun, and I can do that for 2 hours, and it's fine. So it's totally a medium popcorn, but on the good side of what I would call medium. Like, you know, you go to a matinee, you just want a little bit of corn to go with your cheesy movie, and yeah, you got it right there. And this movie is all of that stuff and more. I do know that there's a sequel book. I tried reading it. I got about 50 pages into it and was like, no, this is not an experience I want to go. I've resigned myself to like, I'm going to wait for it to come out on the audiobook and do that and at least try to give it an experience, because I was trying to read it. I was like, I just can't. The Klein's prose, I just can't read. It's just not, my mind just doesn't work that way anymore. But I know that they're talking about doing a sequel to it. If I'd be curious to see, because I mean, the thing made $580 million. Good grief. Any studio would go, yes, Steven, you can make a new one, or whoever. Zemeckis, whoever he wants to hand it off to. Hopefully not Joe Johnson. But no offense, Joe. But I know what the story of Ready Player 2 is. And I'm like, boy, that would be a very stark turn. Because again, the movie's so different than the book anyway. I don't know how they would sell us on that. And I don't want to spoil it any more than that for anybody that wants to read it and experience that on your own. But I'd be curious if they could do a sequel out of this. And part of me thinks that that's just studio talk and that it'll never happen. And I kind of don't want it to, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I have absolutely zero clue what's it called, like Ready Player 2 or something.
It's called
like,
Ready Player 2.
Oh God,
yeah.
I bet I can already deduce what the plot is or something. I just took a shot in the dark of what the sequel was called. But I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I have no interest in reading that. I don't really care. If they do end up making the movie and it comes out, I mean, I'll probably see it if you want to do an episode on it, but I'm not gonna be seeking that out on my own. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I'll have to think long and hard about it. I'll be honest with you. We'll see if that it comes down the line or not. But again, Mike, great to have you here on Film Strip. Tell folks again how they can follow you and how they can keep up with what's going on with Amateur Auteurs.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, thanks again for having me, Jay. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, you can follow the show on Twitter at AuteursPod. You can listen to the show on iTunes, on SoundCloud. I'm sure we're on other stuff, but those are the two that I definitely know. You can email us at the Amateur Auteurs Podcast at gmail.com. Yeah, that's where we are, mostly iTunes and SoundCloud. But yeah, any listen, any review, any like, it's definitely appreciated.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for being here. And folks, thanks for listening to another episode of Film Strip. You can find all of the episodes on filmstrippodcast.com. That'll take you to our Anchor site where you can find distribution points on iTunes, Spotify, Google, all those places. You can check us out. Leave us a positive review. Share the show. You can follow the show's social media at Film Strip Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and catch up with the hosts there. And we appreciate your support. So for Mike from Amateur Auteurs, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to another episode of Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.